She couldn't see the man watching her from across the street. All Jessica knew was the sound of her handler's footsteps getting closer. Blind and terrified, she stumbled through the first door she could find, into the warm, garlic-scented air of a restaurant. She begged the first person she touched for help. But this wasn't just any restaurant. It was owned by the most dangerous crime family in the city. And when the boss saw the tracker on her ankle and heard her story, he didn't call the police. He picked up his phone and gave one order: lock down the entire district. No one gets in or out until we find the man who did this. This is the story of how the most vulnerable become invisible. Jessica is one of over 2,000 documented cases where a person with a disability was targeted for trafficking. Her blindness made her the perfect victim, easy to isolate, hard for authorities to believe. But tonight, her desperation collided with a power that operates outside the law. Why would a mafia boss risk his entire operation for a stranger? And what does he know about the shadowy world of handlers and trafficking rings that even the police can't touch? 6 months earlier, Jessica's world was just quiet darkness and routine. A degenerative condition had stolen her sight by age 22. She lived in a subsidized apartment, relying on a monthly supplemental security income check of $914 and the help of a state-assigned aide for groceries. Her vulnerability wasn't just her blindness. It was the isolation that came with it. Studies show social isolation is the #1 factor traffickers exploit in disabled adults. Then Mark entered her life. He was introduced by a fellow resident as a new community outreach coordinator. He spoke softly, brought her books in Braille, and never treated her like a burden. He said he could help her access better benefits, maybe even a training program for the visually impaired. He became, in her darkened world, a guiding light. This is the grooming phase. Traffickers often pose as kind-hearted helpers, building trust to create dependency. For Jessica, Mark's offer to become her representative payee, to manage her SSI money directly, seemed like a relief from bureaucratic headaches. What she didn't know was that Mark wasn't one man operating alone. He was a handler, a low-level recruiter for a network that specifically targeted people on disability roles. This is called benefits trafficking, an emerging and brutal scheme where traffickers harvest government checks from the vulnerable. They provide just enough care to keep the person alive, while pocketing every cent of their benefits. Jessica signed the papers. And with that signature, she legally vanished into a system not designed to find her. Her new home was a condemned apartment in a building owned by a shell company. She shared one bathroom with 5 others, all with various disabilities. Their checks were direct deposited into an account only Mark controlled. The promises of training vanished. Instead, she was forced to make fundraising calls for a fake charity, reading scripts that exploited her genuine, tremulous voice to squeeze donations from the elderly. If she failed to meet her quota, her meals were withheld. The tracker was locked on her ankle for her safety, Mark said. The outside world ceased to exist. Meanwhile, 4 blocks away, the restaurant La Famiglia operated as the de facto town hall for the Catalano crime family. Run by Arturo the architect Catalano, it was a place of quiet power. Arturo wasn't a stereotypical thug. He was a strategist who believed in strict old-world codes. His organization had fingers in construction, waste management, and yes, occasional protection rackets. But there were lines. Exploiting children was forbidden, so was trafficking. Not out of morality, but business. It brought the wrong kind of heat, federal heat, human rights investigations, media spotlights that disrupted profitable, low-profile operations. Arturo's younger sister, Sofia, had been born with cerebral palsy. Her life, though challenging, was surrounded by fierce family protection and the best care money could buy. His personal rule against preying on the disabled was ironclad. The handlers operating in his district knew this. They stayed away from Catalan-owned buildings and paid their street taxes on time. It was an uneasy, silent truce. The night Jessica stumbled through his doors, Arturo was in the middle of a meeting about a zoning permit. The frantic whisper of his hostess cut through the conversation. "Boss, there's a blind girl at the door. She's saying someone is chasing her. She looks broken." Arturo found Jessica just inside the entrance, arms outstretched, tears cutting paths through the dirt on her face. She was whispering, "Please, I can't go back. He'll lock me in the dark again." Then Arturo's eyes dropped to her ankle, to the bulky plastic band, not a medical alert bracelet, a GPS tracker used by pimps and handlers to monitor human property. In that moment, the business calculation evaporated. This wasn't just a breach of his territory, it was a spit on his code. The handler had gotten greedy, recruiting right under his nose, thinking the blind girl was invisible enough to not matter. Archero's order to lock down the district wasn't purely altruistic. It was a message. In his city, his rules were law, and someone was about to learn the price of breaking them. His men fanned out. Steel shutters rolled down over every Catalano-controlled business within 8 blocks. Off-duty cops on the family payroll were called in to casually block key intersections, creating a soft perimeter. No one was searching for a missing person. They were hunting for a handler named Mark, on behalf of a boss who had just declared personal war. Back in the restaurant's private office, wrapped in a blanket, Jessica sipped water from a trembling hand. A woman named Rosa, Archero's most trusted lieutenant, spoke to her in a gentle, steady voice. "Jessica, we need to know everything. Who is Mark? Where did he take you? Who else was there?" The information spilled out in fractured pieces. The address of the building, the fake charity name, the others trapped with her. As Rosa compiled the details, Archero stared at a map of the district. The address Jessica gave was a property he didn't own, but he knew its landlord, a greedy, independent operator named Derek who asked no questions for cash. This was a safe house, which meant there were more. This wasn't a solo act. This was an organized operation, a network moving disabled victims through the city like ghost assets. Just then, Rosa looked up from her notepad, her face pale. "Boss," she says something else. She says last week, Mark brought in a new girl, younger. She heard them call her the deaf girl from the bus station. And Mark said, he said she was a special delivery for a client who pays double for quiet ones. Archero's blood went cold. A deaf girl, a special order. This wasn't just benefits fraud anymore. This was something darker, a niche market within the trafficking world he'd only heard whispers about. The handler in his district wasn't just stealing government checks. He was selling people, their disabilities making them coveted merchandise for predators who wanted victims who couldn't identify them or scream for help. He looked at Jessica, who sat shivering, unaware of the horror she'd just unveiled. The lockdown was containing the problem, but it had also trapped the prey. Somewhere in the sealed-off district, a handler named Mark now knew he was being hunted. And with him, he had a deaf girl who was meant to be delivered tonight. The clock was ticking. If they didn't find them before the client got impatient or Mark got desperate. The hunt began not with sirens, but with whispers. Archero's network was a human search engine powered by fear and loyalty. Bartenders, street vendors, and building supers who owed him favors became his eyes. The order was simple: find a man matching Mark's description or a young deaf woman without alerting the police or causing a panic. Within minutes, a call came from a laundromat owner 2 blocks over. He'd seen a nervous man fitting the description, arguing with a driver in an alley behind his shop about an hour earlier. The driver's van had a logo for Metro Medical Transport. This was the first crack. Medical transport companies are a common front for trafficking networks. They have legitimate reasons to move people, often those with disabilities, with little scrutiny. Rosa cross-referenced the name with known shell companies. Bingo! Metro Medical Transport was registered to a Derek Simmons, the same landlord of Jessica's building. The operation wasn't just in Archero's district. It was using his district as a processing hub. Archero made a decision that broke every rule of his cautious operation. He called a detective on his payroll, not to report a crime, but to access a database. He needed the real-time GPS location of every Metro Medical Transport vehicle. The risk was astronomical. This digital trail could lead back to him, but the image of the deaf girl as a special delivery overrode his caution. The detective, after a tense silence, agreed. The price would be steep, but payable later. While they waited for the data, Rosa took Jessica to a secure apartment above the restaurant. With patience, she learned more. The others in Jessica's building weren't just random victims. They were all recipients of Social Security disability or supplemental security income. Their checks were the target. Mark and his associates would rotate them through different apartments to avoid suspicion from postal inspectors, forging documents to redirect their benefits to new addresses they controlled. The victims received just enough food and medication to stay functional, their lives stripped down to a single purpose: generate government money. Then the GPS data arrived. 3 Metro medical vans were active in the city. One was at a known clinic. One was on a highway heading out of state. The third was stationary in a warehouse district just outside the lockdown perimeter. Archero's men were already moving toward the warehouse when a second, more urgent call came through. A cook from a diner on the district's edge reported a van matching the description had pulled into the back of a shuttered printing plant 20 minutes ago. The driver looked jumpy. They had 2 targets, the warehouse outside the perimeter and the printing plant inside it. They had to split forces. Archero took 4 men to the printing plant. Rosa coordinated the team heading to the warehouse. The clock was ticking. If the client was waiting at one of these locations, the arrival of unknown cars could trigger a violent reaction or a rushed disappearance. At the printing plant, Archero's team approached silently. The old building was dark except for a single ground-floor office light. Through a grimy window, they saw a man, Mark, packing, checking his phone repeatedly, but no girl. The van was empty. Was this a pickup point, or had the delivery already happened? Archero gave the signal. His men breached the door with terrifying efficiency. Mark was on the floor, restrained before he could even scream. The interrogation was swift and brutal. Mark, faced with the cold fury of a mafia boss rather than the procedural questions of police, broke almost immediately. He was a freelancer, a recruiter. He identified vulnerable adults from social service waiting rooms, support groups, and even online disability forums. His job was to gain trust, become their payee, and then transfer them to the holding network. He got a $2,000 bonus for each person he brought in. The deaf girl, he confessed through sobs, was a specific request from a high-paying client. She was supposed to be delivered tonight to a private address, but his contact had gone silent after Archero's lockdown started. She was still in the district, stashed in a different safe house he didn't know the location of. The client was getting impatient. Meanwhile, Rosa's team reached the warehouse. Inside, they didn't find a girl. They found a records room, piles of files, benefit statements, forged power of attorney documents, and a ledger. This was the administrative heart of the operation. The ledger was the bombshell. It listed not 6 victims, but 47, each with a code: BD for blind, DF for deaf, ID for intellectual disability. Next to each code was a dollar amount, their monthly benefit, and a percentage marked client fee for about a third of the names. The deaf girl's code, DF12, had the highest client fee of all, 80% of her monthly check, plus a $5,000 acquisition bonus. This wasn't just benefits trafficking. This was a hybrid model. For most, they siphoned off government checks. But for some, like the deaf girl, their disability made them doubly valuable. They were both continuous benefit streams and commodities for private exploitation. The network had clients who paid a premium for victims with specific disabilities, people they considered less likely or able to report abuse. Rosa called Archero, her voice tight. "Boss, this is bigger. This is an organization. The ledger, it has initials for handlers, drop points, and codes that look like buyer references. This goes beyond the city." Archero looked down at Mark, now whimpering on the floor. The handler was just a cog. Taking him out would do nothing. The network would simply replace him. The deaf girl was still missing, and now they knew she was worth more to the client dead than lost. If they couldn't deliver her, she might be silenced permanently to cover tracks. Then Mark, desperate to trade, choked out a new piece of information. "The girl, DF12, she's not in a building, she's mobile. In the van, my driver, Leo, has her. He's supposed to circle until he gets the all-clear for delivery. He's got a police scanner. If he hears any chatter about our operation, his orders are to dispose of the product and run." Every patrol car, every unmarked police vehicle Archero had subtly deployed to create the perimeter was now a potential death sentence. Leo, circling somewhere in the lockdown district with a deaf girl in the back of a medical van, was listening for any sign that his operation was compromised. The lockdown meant he couldn't get out, but if he thought he was caught, his orders were to kill his passenger and flee on foot. Archero faced an impossible choice: call off his men, make the district appear normal, and hope Leo felt safe enough to show himself for the delivery, or flood the zone with everything he had to find one specific van before a panicked driver made a fatal decision. He had minutes to decide. He looked at Rosa through the phone. "Get me every car, every bike, every pair of eyes we have. Find that van. But tell them no sirens, no lights, no radio chatter. We have to find a ghost without making a sound. Search for the van became a silent, high-stakes ballet. 20 of Archero's associates, in unmarked sedans and delivery trucks, began crawling through the gridlocked streets of the lockdown district. Their instructions were clear: locate a white Metro medical transport van, license plate ending in 73K. Do not approach. Do not signal. Just report its location and follow at a distance. The district, usually bustling, was eerily quiet under the soft lockdown. The tension was a live wire. One police radio call about a traffic stop, one siren in the distance, could be the trigger. Back at the printing plant, Archero turned his attention back to Mark. The handler, now realizing his life was forfeit either way, began to talk faster. He gave up the names of 2 other recruiters. He described the disposal protocol. Drivers carried a lethal dose of insulin in their medical kits. A shot would induce a coma that looked like a diabetic emergency. The victim would be dumped at a hospital curb, dead on arrival, with no trace back to the network. It was a clean, clinical exit strategy. But as Archero pressed for the client's identity, the one who wanted the deaf girl, Mark's fear shifted. It wasn't fear of Archero anymore, it was a deeper, more primal terror. "You don't understand," he whispered. "They're not just some creep, they're protected. My contact said if I ever spoke that name, my whole family would disappear into a system that makes this look like daycare." This was the pivot. The client wasn't just a wealthy predator. The client had institutional protection. The network had buyers with power. Rosa's voice crackled over a secure line. "Boss, we've got the van, corner of 8th and Mercer. It's idling in a bus lane. Driver, on the phone, looks agitated." Archero ordered a 3-block perimeter. No one got in or out. He left Mark zip-tied to a pipe and sped toward the location. From a rooftop across the street, Archero watched through binoculars. The van's side door had no windows. The deaf girl, DF12, was in there, but so was a driver, Leo, who was now clearly spooked, constantly checking his mirrors and his scanner. The delivery window had passed. The client had likely aborted. Leo was a trapped animal with a lethal option in his glove box. Archero needed to extract the girl without spooking the driver into acting. A direct assault risked a violent reaction. A negotiation was impossible. Then he saw it. A city bus, diverted by the unofficial roadblocks, was turning onto the street. It would pass right by the van. He got on the radio. "Rosa, the bus. When it pulls even with the van, I need a distraction. Something loud on the opposite side of the street." A car backfire, a dumpster lid, anything to make Leo look left for 5 seconds. The plan was insane. As the bus lumbered closer, one of Archero's men, positioned down the block, slammed a metal garbage can lid onto the pavement. The sharp bang echoed. Leo's head jerked toward the sound. In that moment, Archero and another man moved. They slipped from the alley, opened the van's passenger door, unlocked because Leo was the only one supposed to get out, and slid inside. The interior was dark, smelling of antiseptic and fear. In the back, strapped to a gurney with medical restraints, was a young woman no older than 19. She couldn't hear the commotion. She saw only shadows moving. Her eyes were wide with a terror that spoke of horrors already endured. Archero put a finger to his lips, though she couldn't see the gesture in the dark. He showed her his open, empty hands, then pointed to the driver and made a cutting motion across his own throat. "We are here for him, not you." Understanding flickered in her eyes. She went still. Up front, Leo turned back and froze. Archero was already in the passenger seat, a gun leveled not at Leo, but at the medical kit on the dashboard. "The insulin is in there, yes," Archero said, his voice a calm monotone. "Reach for it and I put a bullet through it and then through you. Put both hands on the wheel." Leo complied, trembling. "Now," Archero continued, "you will drive exactly where I tell you. You make one wrong move, and my friend in the back will remove the girl from this van while I remove you from this world. Understood?" They drove, a bizarre procession, with the van followed at a discreet distance by Archero's fleet. They went to a Catalan-owned garage. The girl, who signed her name as Chloe, was rushed upstairs to safety with Jessica. Leo, the driver, was secured. They had prevented an immediate death, but the real problem was just beginning. Interrogating Leo revealed the next layer. He wasn't just a driver, he was a transporter for the network's premium line. He moved victims with specific disabilities to and from appointments with clients who paid for private, controlled access. Chloe, being deaf, was considered a low-risk, high-value asset. His delivery tonight was to a waterfront warehouse owned by a numbered company. The client was a man Leo knew only as the benefactor, who used a voice modulator on the phone and paid in untraceable cryptocurrency. But Leo also carried a digital manifest on an encrypted tablet. When Rosa hacked it, the scope of the operation came into horrifying focus. The network had 3 tiers. Tier 1, benefits harvesting from 40-plus victims. Tier 2, labor trafficking, forcing disabled adults into piecework or begging. Tier 3, this premium line, a private roster of about 10 individuals with sensory or intellectual disabilities, rented out to a select clientele for unspecified purposes at fees reaching $20,000 per session. The ledger from the warehouse now made sense. The client fee percentage was the cut the network took from the Tier 3 rentals. Chloe Code, DF12, had an appointment history. She'd been rented 4 times in the past 2 months. The reality was worse than anyone had imagined. This wasn't a side hustle. It was a diversified human commodity business built on the systematic exploitation of disability. Then came the hammer blow. Cross-referencing the numbered company that owned the waterfront warehouse, Rosa found a shell within a shell. The ultimate parent company was a non-profit foundation called the Havenbrook Trust, which listed its mission as providing supportive housing and advocacy for adults with disabilities. It was a perfect cover. It received state grants, held charity galas, and had a board of directors that included a city councilman and a respected psychiatrist. The network wasn't hiding in the shadows. It was operating in plain sight, disguised as charity. The benefactor wasn't just a client. He was likely a high-level figure within or connected to this legitimate-seeming organization. This explained the institutional protection Mark was so afraid of. They weren't just fighting traffickers. They were up against a structure with political connections, a public image, and the ability to discredit any accusation as a misunderstanding or slander. Arturo stood in the garage, looking at the 2 rescued girls being tended to, and then at the 2 captured low-level operatives. He had blown his organization's secrecy wide open for this. He had evidence of a vast, protected criminal enterprise, but he was a crime boss. He couldn't go to the police. Anything he gave them would be tainted, unusable in court, and would likely get him arrested. Yet letting this network continue was unthinkable. Rosa approached him holding the tablet. "There's more," she said, her voice hollow. "The manifest has future appointments. Chloe was tonight, but there's another, BD04, a blind male, scheduled for a long-term residential placement with a client tomorrow afternoon. The notes say client requires total dependency for home care scenario. It's a permanent sale, Arturo. They're selling a blind man into domestic servitude tomorrow." The mission had just changed. It was no longer about stopping a delivery. It was about dismantling an empire. And they had less than 24 hours to find a blind man they knew only as BD04, identify the powerful client known as the benefactor, and expose the Havenbrook Trust, all without the law catching them first. Arturo made a decision that would forever break the mold of who he was. He looked at Rosa and gave the order that would bridge this escalation into all-out war. "Bring me the councilman's schedule. We're not waiting for them to make a move. We are going to make ours. Tonight, we turn their charity gala into a battlefield." The Havenbrook Trust's annual Night of Light Gala was the city's most exclusive charity event. Held in a crystal chandeliered ballroom, it was where the wealthy and powerful patted themselves on the back for their compassion. Tonight, it would become a trap. Arturo and Rosa, dressed in tailored evening wear, entered not as guests, but as predators. Their team was already in place. A hacker in a van nearby ready to breach the Trust's servers, and men positioned at every exit. Arturo's target was Councilman Gregory Pratt, a silver-haired fixture on the Trust's board. Pratt was moving through the crowd, all smiles and handshakes. Arturo intercepted him near the champagne fountain. "Councilman, a word in private. It's about a substantial donation to the Trust, and about the BD04 file." Pratt's smile didn't falter, but his eyes flickered with a sudden, cold alarm. He led Arturo to a soundproofed sponsor lounge. Inside, Arturo didn't sit. "You have a blind man, BD04, scheduled for sale tomorrow. The bidding starts at what, 50,000? I'm here to make a counteroffer. You call off the sale, dismantle the Tier 3 roster, and I don't release every digital ledger, every encrypted client list, and every dirty email from the Trust servers to every news desk in the country by sunrise. Pratt laughed a dry, dismissive sound. "You're bluffing, our systems are impenetrable, and who are you? Some two-bit gangster with a sudden conscience? You have no idea who you're dealing with." It was then that Archero's phone buzzed. A message from Rosa: "Hack complete. We have the master server, downloading now. The benefactor's ID is it's the psychiatrist, Dr. Alastair Vance." Dr. Vance was the Trust's founding board member, a revered figure who testified before state legislatures on disability rights. He was the public face of compassion. He was also, according to the files, the architect of the premium line. He used his psychiatric evaluations of Trust clients to identify the most vulnerable, the most isolated, the least likely to be believed, and he catalogued them for the network. Archero showed the name on his phone to Pratt. The councilman's face drained of blood. The game was up. But instead of surrendering, Pratt's fear turned to rage. "You fool, do you think this ends with us? The clients, their judges, businessmen, pillars. You expose this, you don't get justice. You start a war you cannot win." At that moment, Dr. Vance himself entered the lounge, drawn by Pratt's absence. He took in the scene, Archero's threatening posture, Pratt's panic, and his genteel mask slipped for just a second, revealing something calculating and vicious. "I see we have an uninvited guest," Vance said smoothly. "Councilman, perhaps we should call security and have this man removed for harassment." Archero played his final card. He activated a speakerphone app. Rosa's voice filled the room, broadcast from the hacked server. "Dr. Vance, your 4 p.m. memo to the benefactor account is quite revealing. BD04 presents optimal conditions for long-term control. Total visual deprivation heightens dependency. Recommend acquisition for Client 7's home care project." Shall I read Client 7's name? It's in the file. Vance froze. The clinical, monstrous language of his own memo hung in the air. The proof was undeniable and already out of his control. Outside the lounge, the gala continued, the string quartet playing, utterly unaware of the conspiracy unraveling in their midst. Archero issued his demands. "You will log into the network's operational dashboard right now, on your phone. You will cancel all pending appointments. You will send a system-wide alert that the premium line is terminated due to security concerns. Then, you will give me the current location of BD04. You do this, and you both walk out of here tonight to face the legal system. You refuse, and my associate releases every file with your names highlighted in 60 seconds. Cornered with digital evidence already in hostile hands, Vance complied. His hands shook as he accessed a hidden app and input the commands. The sale of BD04 was cancelled. An alert flared across the network, causing panic in the digital shadows. Then he provided an address, a private medical facility on the city's outskirts, ironically named Serenity Springs. Rosa relayed the address to a separate team already mobilized. The race was on. While Archero kept Vance and Pratt contained, his men hit Serenity Springs. What they found was not a dungeon, but a sterile, quiet ward. BD04 was a man in his 40s named David, who had lost his sight to a childhood accident. He was sedated in a private room, being prepped for transfer to a new residential sponsor. The paperwork listed Dr. Vance as the approving physician and Client 7 as the sponsor. Client 7's name, when found in Vance's files, was a shock, a federal judge known for his tough-on-crime stance. David and 4 other premium line victims were recovered that night. The simultaneous digital dump of the Havenbrook Trust's secret files, anonymously delivered to major media outlets and the state attorney general's office, ignited a firestorm. The story exploded at dawn. Prominent charity, a front for trafficking ring. Councilman Pratt was arrested at his home. Dr. Vance attempted to flee, but was detained at the airport. The network, its cover blown and its leadership in chaos, began to implode. Within 72 hours, law enforcement agencies, acting on the detailed evidence, raided 27 properties, freeing over 40 victims from the benefits harvesting tiers. But the real closure came in the quiet aftermath. With the network shattered, Archero faced his own reckoning. He had exposed his own organization's capabilities to law enforcement in the process. He knew his time as a shadow power was over. He began a controlled dismantling of his criminal enterprises, moving his legitimate businesses to the forefront. The lockdown of the district, the war on the trafficking network, it became a legend on the street, a final, defiant act that forever changed his reputation. Jessica and Chloe were placed into a genuinely secure victim protection program, one with disability-informed advocates. With proper trauma counseling and legal support, they began the long road to recovery. Jessica's testimony, given via video link from a safe location, was crucial in securing indictments. Chloe, through a sign language interpreter, provided devastating details that closed the case against Vance. The final, surprising detail emerged from the forensic accounting of the Havenbrook Trust. Among the list of donors was a shell company that funneled money back to the trust. That shell company was traced to a private equity firm owned by none other than Client 7, the federal judge. His donation was essentially reinvesting a portion of his criminal profits into the charity that supplied his victims. The hypocrisy was so profound, it made national headlines and guaranteed a life sentence. On a cool evening 3 months later, Arturo stood on the rooftop of his restaurant. The district was quiet, back to normal. Rosa joined him, handing him a sealed envelope. It was from Jessica. It contained no return address, just a single sentence in Braille, which Rosa had transcribed. "Thank you for being the door when all I knew were walls." Arturo folded the note and placed it in his pocket. He hadn't saved the world. He hadn't even saved his own way of life. But he had opened a door, and for the people who had been trapped in the dark, that was everything. The system had failed them. The law had been blind to them. But on one chaotic night, a different kind of power had seen them, and that had made all the difference. The story of Jessica and Arturo is fiction, but the crisis it portrays is not. The National Human Trafficking Hotline has documented thousands of cases involving victims with pre-existing disabilities. The real-world networks are just as cunning, often hiding behind legitimate fronts like care facilities or charities. They prey on isolation, on the gap between need and support, turning human beings into ghost assets on a ledger. The haunting question isn't how a mafia boss could become a rescuer, but why our systems so often fail to fill that role. Why are people with disabilities up to 4 times more likely to be targeted? The answer lies in the very vulnerabilities the system creates: isolation, communication barriers, and a lack of disability-informed training for those meant to protect. Traffickers see an opportunity where society sees a burden. The lockdown of a district is a dramatic fantasy. The real work is less cinematic, but more critical. It's training first responders to recognize the signs of trafficking in disabled adults. It's creating accessible reporting tools for victims who cannot use a standard hotline. It's scrutinizing unregulated care homes and representative payee arrangements. It's seeing the invisible. Jessica's fictional rescue required a collision of desperation and unlikely power. In reality, rescue begins with awareness. It begins when a neighbor wonders about the new caregiver who never lets the blind woman speak for herself. It begins when a nurse notices a patient with an unexplained injury and a handler who answers every question. It begins when we choose to look closer at the shadows we usually ignore. You have now seen the blueprint of this particular darkness. You know the tactics, the grooming, the benefits theft, the calculated exploitation of vulnerability. This knowledge is a tool. Share this story. Talk about the reality behind it. If something you see doesn't feel right, it might not be. Trust that instinct. The true ending to this story is not yet written. It's being written by advocates, by law enforcement undergoing new training, and by communities learning to protect their most vulnerable. It continues with every victim identified and every network disrupted. You are part of that narrative now. Your attention is the first line of defense. Stay aware, stay engaged. And if you want to see more stories that pull back the curtain on hidden worlds, make sure to subscribe. Together, we can turn the light on.